born in the pit of the Depression, the worst month to December of 1933. And but it was a good time to be born in a way. Although 2 months before I was born, Adolf Hitler took his position as the worst man ever born. And but also 2 months before I was born, also the Prohibition ended. Not that it affected me at that age. But I fell in love with puppets. I saw a puppet show when I was 5 in kindergarten, and it was about 3 little kittens and how they lost their mittens. And at the end of the show, I think there were college students that were doing it, because children have no idea how old people are. And I remember I had a 5-year-old guess I was 100. And they were off by a couple years at least. So, this child right next to it thought I was 17. I'd like to get better. But anyway, I fell in love with this puppet show. They came out and they still had the puppets on their hands. I think they were little Steiff puppets in Germany. And I thought that was so great they could tell this little story. And I thought for a minute I wondered if they were real kids, except they not quite real, you know. And by the time I was 8, I found a puppet for 5 cents at a church rummage sale. I decided I could do a puppet show with this one puppet. And I had a stuffed green flannel snake my mother had made for Christmas, because we had no money. But it didn't seem like we had a hard time. We had a house. It was not heated. Only 2 rooms were heated. Water would freeze solid beside you at night. It was pretty cold getting dressed, but it was below freezing in your room. But we had a lot of scrap lumber in an old little barn, and I built a puppet theater. I scrapped some cloth for my mother and made some curtains. And I gave it a show. I put a sign up in the post office, come to Spinney see puppet show, 2 cents. 16 people came, so I was rich. 32 cents in 1942 was, that was big money. You could go to the movies 3 times on 32 cents. And it was 9 cents to go to the movie if you were a kid. And there was always cowboy movies. So at that time I wasn't sure I was going to be a cowboy with a puppet on my hand. My mother saw the show, and a lot of the people were mothers, as a bunch of children, and they went away smiling. I can't imagine what I did for 20 minutes with just a monkey puppet, which was so loose, it wobbled all around my hand. And but my mother was a very creative artist, and she built me for Christmas, unbeknownst to me. My birthday is the day after Christmas, which is why she gave me Carol, a Christmas Carol. I didn't think that was very funny when I was and then also, I'm assuming they've known for my puppets, because she started building puppets for me. It was a bunch of Judy shows she built for my 9th birthday, which was, my birthday was actually 5 hours after Christmas, but we always celebrated on Christmas. And she didn't realize she was giving me my career with that puppet show, theater, everything. And my brother helped her build it. And knowing how my brother was, she must have held a gun on him. Because he didn't like his little brother very much. So he helped her build it, and so I started doing puppet shows a few years later for birthday parties and stuff, and I put myself through art school. I went to the Art Institute of Boston, and I was never sure which I was going to do, be an illustrator and cartoonist or a puppeteer. So I did my best at both of them to see which one would win. But I must say that puppeting is more fun if you can make it than the drawing, only because you can hear the laughter. But in around 1960, Jim Henson first started appearing on in some commercials for a coffee company, and they looked a little bit like versions of Kermit the Frog. And one would come on and say, "Do you drink Wilkins coffee?" "No." And he had a can with him, and he blew right off the stage. Jim Henson loved to blow people up, pull their noses off, doing these things. And working with Jim, he was the voice of Ernie. And Ernie is show was a bit ridiculous with Bert. And he, that was a little side of Jim that was a lot of fun. But he was also a genius and a very sweet man too. So it was really quite something. But I'm jumping ahead. How can I get to Sesame Street? Sunny day, sweeping the clouds away. Well, I didn't have that voice for that character yet, because I've never had a character that seemed to call for that voice. And most of my puppets were built sort of like King Friday. Their mouths were just painted on, so there was no lip sticking. But I particularly liked the alligator and the dragon I had, because they were like mouth puppets. And so I got a job. I had my first TV show in Las Vegas, a city of 5,000 people in 1955. And I have said there's more people there now. 2 million, I think. But it really was only 5,000. And with North Las Vegas, they had 55,000, so it wasn't just a tiny place. But Vegas itself was this little tiny bungalow in the desert. And I got my first show there, and it paid $10 a week. I would have done it for free, I'm telling them. Because I wanted to get into television. Television was only 8 years old at that time in America. So here I was now on television at 21 years old. And, but it didn't last long because I was pretty well, I was in the Air Force station there, and suddenly they shipped me to Germany at the end of the show. But I knew I was going to get back into television. And I'm going to bring somebody else because he's teaching me. I'm bringing a friend a little early because there's a little girl who was here, and she's probably going to last the evening. So I think she's waiting for something more entertaining than me. Well, look at you. I can't really see you. It's right. They're looking at me. Oh. Who are you looking at? You look at me? Boy, you think it's funny, huh? Boy, I'm sorry about that. Probably society. What's that mean? We don't use that word on Sesame Street. So Oscar's voice came about. I had met, later on I met Jim, and I'll tell you a little bit about that after this, but he told me he was going to build 2 puppets, and he wondered if I would like to work with him and play those puppets. One was going to be a Grouch in a trash pile, and the other was a goofy yellow bird. And so he built the bird around me. The first big bird, I haven't seen any pictures of that, but he had almost no feathers at all above his eyes. And he looked rather like he didn't have any room for a brain. And he also, he described him as Mickey Mouse's pal Goofy. So he should talk in a real goofy way. So the first big bird came on and said, "Well, here I am, a big bird." I could have sung, "I love you, but But after we did the show a little bit, I decided he should be a kid. What good is a big goofy guy hanging around your kids? And if he's a child, he could be learning a lot with kids at home. And so he became a surrogate child of Sesame Street. And but I jumped way ahead of the story. I didn't tell you how first I got the voice for Oscar. Oscar, I had never done a voice like him. I didn't have any puppets like Oscar. And so it was the last day before we were going to tape, and I was going across town in Manhattan, and a taxi picked me up, and he said, "Where to, Mac?" And started talking about how much he hated Mayor Lindsay. And he was very liberal there. And this guy wasn't liberal. And he went on and on. I said, "What a good voice." He had a cigar street on one side of his mouth, and he wasn't from some other country like most people are now. He was from the Bronx, I'm sure. But it was fun to listen to. And he just grouched all about the mayor until we got across town. But I kept saying in my head, "Where to, Mac? Where to, Mac?" I went in the studio, Jim Henson was waiting there with the puppet builder. They get away from my trash can. I said, that'll do fine. And I had a job. But as a bird, after just a short while, I decided he should be a kid. I said, but let me go back and get a little bit more. You can't make it what you want to say. Thanks. Did I say thanks? What's wrong with that? I get laughed out of the Grouch Club. I never liked you either.
Oscar? You can talk now.
You can come back in a while, Oscar. So, so I worked on the Bozo Show for a total of 10 years, but after the first 9 years, I decided I would like to do something better, something more worthwhile for the world, for myself. So I went to a puppet festival, happened to be in Salt Lake City that year, and when I got there, I discovered Jim Henson was there, and I didn't know he was scouting for someone to play Big Bird and Oscar, and which where he built it. So I had gone on the previous year. I got to the puppet festival and seen some wonderful artistic things. So I built an elaborate theater. I had gotten into producing animated films, and because I'm a cartoonist, and I made a very elaborate theater which I could project pictures on the screen, so I could change my theater. I made this magnificent theater. It didn't last long. It burned out pretty soon, but not until I got the job. And I could project on this puppets, which I did in animation, and then have them appear to jump towards you, and then immediately I come up with the puppet of it, so you go from two-dimensional screen to a three-dimensional puppet that relates to the artist. And but everything went wrong. They threw a light on the screen, so I looked up to see it because I'm working like this, and the film was on a different control thing than the sound. So you couldn't stop this one. If you started at the same time, everything was in perfect sync. But I now realize I couldn't work to the screen because I couldn't even see it. They put a big floodlight on and washed my movie screen off. I was projecting from the rear and running everything with knee switches because I had to be on my knees while doing this. Otherwise the theater would have been over 12 feet high. And I had to turn off the projector and turn off the sound, and now everything would be not in sync. And did I mention Jim Henson was in the audience? I was hoping to impress him favorably, now everything was completely terrible. And but I did manage to finally get the last scene I had put together, and I got a big applause on that. And also I was very funny in my desperation. And so it had I was hoping maybe they'll make up for the fact I'm doing the worst show we ever saw. So I'm putting it all, the show ended finally, and everybody went away, and I'm putting things away and I hear a voice saying, I like what you were trying to do. I turned around to Jim Henson. And he had related how he'd had some disasters on stage himself. And so he then said, would you, when you're building a large bird and would you, Grouch, would you want to work on my show with me, this new show? And of course, I had always earlier hoped that I'd work with Walt Disney, because I drew cartoons all from my childhood. And I had gone to the Disney Studios in 1957 after I got out of the Air Force. And would you know, as I was showing my cartoons to the art director, Walt Disney walked into the room, which was, I was meeting the first of three great artists I was going to meet. The second one was Jim Henson, and the third one was Andrew Wyeth, who I like to paint too, and I love his work. And I spent the afternoon with him. So I met all three, but Jim Henson was the leader of them all. He was the nicest, kindest, funniest, and serious man. But he invited me to come down to New York and we talked about how I'd get the job, what I'd do. And he,
I don't know.
It's my wife. See, so he was explaining how we were going to do for this, for Sesame Street, which he didn't create. He was hired to be on it. And was so awful that people would go there just to hear somebody be that awful. So, I'm kind of sorry I didn't meet the guy, since I have to do my own version of it without ever meeting him. But, so Jim really opened the door finally to what I really think I should be doing, working on Sesame Street. The show is now, we're taping our 44th year. It'll be on Monday. Oscar is going naturally being annoying. And so, Big Bird, of course, was created along at the same time. I was a little disappointed how he looked to start with. He had no feathers at the top of his head. He looked, and his feathers were all put on, actually, on the bottom side of him, so he was all raggedy looking. And I didn't know what to do. Jim said he should be like Goofy. So the first show, we go, but as I say, I decided he should be a kid. But people often, one time a whole bunch of people were being very rowdy, and they seen Big Bird go into a protected area where he could undress, get back to my own clothes. And so when I came home, they said, "You're Big Bird." I said, "Do I look tall enough to be Big Bird?" And they said, "Oh no." So they weren't, it was a rough crowd. And but he's tall because my right hand is up, and I hold his head in my hand. And his head is about this much higher with all the feathers that are above the mechanical works of it. It's pretty simple. My thumb operates the lower jaw, and my little finger is the only finger you can spare because it's so heavy. You have to use your other fingers to keep it from walking off your hand. And on that is a piece of bent steel, little wire, which is very stiff. Has to be bent with pliers. And that's a little thing I can push. And if you ever watch the show, you notice Big Bird's eyebrows are going up and down with his thoughts. So it looks like he has a real thinking process. And so Oscar's eyes are going down too. They're elastic bands. It's just very simple. It's nothing high tech. Don't tell him all my secrets. Yeah. So I must say, I feel that I don't feel that I am Big Bird or that I am Oscar. I feel that if I talk to both of them as in the third person, like what Oscar would say or what Big Bird would say. But I don't mind if people say hi, Big Bird, because I kind of like it when people say hello. There's a very delicate balance that they found out, because when they first started Sesame Street, it was all brand new. It was a different way of approaching teaching on television than they ever did before. And but from experience, we learned how to make a better show all the time. And there was a delicate balance of what works and what doesn't work with children. One that was really great was Mr. Hooper's death scene. We didn't see him die, but Big Bird comes along. He in the old days in the story, he was going to be an artist when he grew up. And so I always did the drawings for him. And I must say, he's supposed for a 6-year-old bird, he draws awfully well. But I still have the picture that he drew. So he has drawn a picture of the 7 living characters of the show, Elise and Maria and Gordon and Susan. And so I'm giving a cartoon of each one of the caricature. Pretty awfully good for a 6-year-old, wasn't it? But they had to look right for it. So I said, "Now this is Mr. Hooper's. So where is he? I want to get him this picture." I said, "Well, don't you remember, Big Bird, he told you that he died?" "I remember that. But when's he coming back?" I said, "Don't you understand?" They found this through law studies that certain age children don't understand that, get to that. Not saying that if it's reincarnation, maybe your work or something. But anyway, so Big Bird he sinks in and says, "But he's not coming back ever?" And we all loved Willie, who played Mr. Hooper, and he had been blacklisted back in the 40s or 50s with He did a lot of theater with people they considered communists. And believe me, I know Will Lee was no communist. He was the mentor to James Earl Jones. And James Earl Jones told me that he would never have been a common actor if it wasn't for Mr. Will Lee, for convincing him, because he was a stutterer, that whenever he knew his lines, though, he never stuttered. You never see, because he says he still stutters at times, and he's trying to just tell you something, to tell, And so, I didn't even know that until about 2 years ago when James Earl Jones had been on the show a number of times. And I was pleased to hear that. So Big Bird is getting sadder and sadder. And, but then they try to console him, because who's going to tell me stories? He told me stories. He made birdseed Sundays. And they said they would do those things for him. And so gradually it kind of got so he could smile a little and understand a little bit about that. I think that's probably one of the most beautiful shows we ever did. And I noticed it just coming out now in Old School 3. And that episode is included in that. I must say it was really good. But another thing I discovered that I could have Big Bird do is to actually act out some of the ways we maybe should be. We were on Broadway in the early first 16 years, and so Broadway was a strange place because there was very little traffic on it. I mean, sometimes it's a rush hour, you see only 6 cars, the whole length of the road you could see, but either direction. And I never could understand why there's nobody on Broadway in that part. So, but often it'd be old drunks or something, just yelling at the world and bellowing and falling asleep on the park benches that are on the middle of the road. It's a 6-lane road with gardens in the middle. And so this van came along, and it was starting to snow. And I noticed it was getting a little slippery, just a little bit of snow on the ground, on the sidewalks. And there was an oldish man coming along, walking slowly, and he comes to the edge of the curb, and he seemed to act like, I think it's just another one of the drunks on Broadway. But then I started walking across the street, I saw he was still standing there, and I realized he wasn't drunk at all. He was terrified. And I went back and said, "Sir, is there anything you need?" He says, "Well, I live all alone, and there's no one to take care of me if I slip and fall. I'm afraid of falling, it's because it's so slippery." I said, "Would you mind taking my arm?" He said, "Oh, thank you." And we walked a couple of blocks. He says, "This is where I room." I said, "Gee, well, you must have used that." The pay was so poor that I had to sleep on people's couches. So I had a very good job in Boston with Bozo, and I took a huge pay cut to get to Sesame Street, and I'm very glad I did. Sometimes you might have to do that to see to get what you really want in life.
And the compassion.
The compassion. So I realized that this person needed help, and I suddenly was ashamed when I thought that I thought he was just a drunk. Here he was a person who had his worries and his world had become small and so little help. And I was ashamed that I didn't have compassion right to start with. Realized one look I should have known that just could use a little hand. And then I thought that the world could use more compassion. And wouldn't it be nice if we could start teaching that too, along with the arithmetic, the simple arithmetic we do and the alphabet and the various things. So the next morning I went to the producer and said, "I had this epiphany last night, we should be teaching compassion." And they said, "Well, how do you do that?" I said, "Well, I don't know, think about it. We should have compassion as part of what Sesame Street is." She said, "Well, I don't know how you do that." So about 2 years later, so I kept it in mind though. 2 years later, a man did a really wonderful article, which we always like to see, to keep people's minds on Sesame Street. And he went through the various denizens of the street and describing what they were like and all. And he said that finally there's the compassionate big bird you wrote. I'm reading this and said, the compassionate big bird. I did somehow I was doing what I hoped I could transmit. And I don't know how well I did, but I realized that compassion had gotten into a thing. I was very delighted that I must be doing the right thing. I learned a lot about working with children. With the Bozo show, one of the characters I played was Mr. Lion. I was dressed in this lion suit that I had owned it from a different show. And I did my orders myself. I was hidden materially behind the costume. And I would come up, I would take the children's name and write it on the big drawing board so the camera could see. And I'd take the child's name, like Judy, and write Judy on the board with a magic marker. And while the kids then, because we had a live audience, 155 kids every day, so it was really fun. Our show was live, and live is very exciting to work on because it's like being in the theater. They're seeing you, and if I got knocked out cold on live TV, and dancing is flip flop. The ends I didn't pass it on properly. It started to fall, and I did a rubber leg dance, and to keep it from falling off my head, I dove down with it as it was falling, trying to stay behind it because I'm on live TV, and I hit my head on the ring of the surface, which was solid wood, and it was like hitting a brick, and the last time I had, I just pulled it down off my face so it wouldn't show me. But I didn't get up because I was out cold. And Bozo looks and says, well, it looks like flip-flop is really sleepy today. He's going to take a nap. So let's see what the latest toy is from Rebel Toys. So that was one of the experiences. But with Mr. Lion, doing the cartoon things, I would do live appearances and do some of my puppet shows. Sponge Judy, I was still doing it, and Big Bad Dragon, and I would do this in shopping malls. So one time I would have a child come up on the stage and assess what their name is, and then draw it on the board and do the thing, and they got to take home a nice big drawing. And so I said, what's your name? He didn't say anything, and his father says, his name is Tommy. So I wrote Tommy on it, and I was dressed as Mr. Lion, a fabulous costume my mother made, and so I drew a cartoon version of Mr. Lion, and so I finished it and held it up so everybody could see. Not a perfect act because I was blocking it for some of the people, so I'm trying to look on the board. But I handed it to Tommy, and he held it up his shoulder. He looked at his father and said, Lion! And his father looked like he'd just seen the Lord. And I said, I thought that was interesting. But I guess he was just pleased to get a hold of what he needs to take hold of. It was the last thing of the evening, my little show. And so I said, thank you, everybody, and they all drifted away. And I went and loaded the things into my Volkswagen camper bus. Hardly ever ran. And I was loading my puppet stuff into it. And then I came out without the costume on, because we were dressing in curtains. And he said, are you the man who was in the lion suit? I said, yeah. He said, well, I wanted to come and thank you. I said, why? He said, when Tommy said lion, that's the first word he's ever spoken. He's 7 years old, he's never said a word. And I said, really? Does he have aphasia? He said, well, how would you know that? It's true. But I happen to have read it in Reader's Digest that very week. I don't know if it's in relation to autism at all, because you never hear that term mentioned anymore. But 2 years later, I went back to the same town to open a Dunkin' Donuts, and they had Mr. Lion come there and give away Mr. Lion pictures, just for the photos, and they could meet and shake hands with Mr. Lion. And so this handsome boy walks up to me and says, do you remember meeting Mr. Lion? I'm Tommy. I said, oh, Tommy, that drew a picture? Yes, I knew Tommy how to talk. I said, I didn't know I was doing that. And his father said, yes, when we read the paper, you're going to be here. When we went home, he said, Tommy, tell her what it is. So he walks in and he says, "Lion!" And she bursts into tears and danced. You know, and within a week, he learned 12 new words. And before the year was over, his speech was pretty common. Pretty useful. And I was pleased, though that was an early experience that I was able to bring, I guess, I don't know if compassion has to do with this particular case, but the lion, the big bird is a very childlike character. He's still 6 years old, you know, in character, in which I've been doing, I'm 72 years older than my character I play, which makes me the world's oldest child star.
Hi there. Hello.
So, but I get lots of mail, and one of the letters the boy wrote said, "Dear Big Bird, you're my friend. Why don't you come and stay with me? I just got bunk beds. You can have the top." Another one, he said, "Dear Big Bird, I'm your friend, and I think you're my friend. Why don't you come over and play? How about next Thursday?" And then there's one other story too, that I got a letter from a man who wrote that his little boy, Joey, was very ill, and he knew that he wasn't going to make it, even though he was only 5 years old. He had cancer, and the only thing, he hadn't smiled in months. The only thing interested him at all was when Big Bird would come on the show. He was in the hospital, and so he would always perk up a little bit when that was on. Otherwise, he was a very sad, unhappy child in pain. And so the letter said, "Would you please call him? Maybe I'd write a note." So this was before cell phones. So I called and said where I was and that I wanted to speak to Joey. And they said, "Well, it'll take a few minutes to get the wire to him for the phone." And so they brought it in, and his mother and father were visiting him sitting by the bed because they were told that he wasn't very well. Or very, very serious now. And so I talked, "Hello, Joey, it's me, Big Bird." He says, "Is it really you, Big Bird?" I said, "Yes, it is. I heard you've been having a hard time. I just thought I'd call you and say I was thinking of you." And I put Oscar on the phone. He wasn't approaching at all. And I put, "Apparently, frog you." I had imitation of Kermit. And I put him on the phone, anything I could do. And then talking to him, I said, I have a play date with Snuffy, and we're going to play in front of this cave in the park. And he said, so it finally ended. He said, "Thank you for calling me, Big Bird." And I said, "Bye, Joey. And I'm glad I had a chance to talk to you." I got a letter the very next week. He said, "Joey, thank you so much for calling." And Joey, when he hung up the phone, he said, "Big Bird called me. He's my friend." And he closed his eyes. And that was the last thing he said. And he was gone.
He smiled.
And I thought, when I read that letter, what a gift it was that Jim would give me a chance to play Big Bird and Oscar, to be able to do something like that, because I couldn't save his life, but to think that he could die with a smile must be better than what was happening. And so that's part of what Justice Street's done for me. It opened many doors for me, that street. I was asked I was told the Muppets would call me, the head guy of Muppets, the producer, said, "We've had a request for you to be on the Bob Hope, one of the Bob Hope specials, back in this was
76.
1976. And back then, he would do 5 specials every year on NBC. And they would try to get Kermit the Frog. But that was Jim Henson. By then, he was getting ready to produce the Muppet Show, which was not in London. And so he wasn't available because he's Kermit the Frog. So they said, "Well, we could give you Big Bird." And they said, "Okay, we can have some fun with that, so send him." And I said, well, no, it's a yellow bird. And, what kind of bird? I said, just large. So I said, I win him over. And the jokes they'd written on Blake, believe it or not, it was his show that created
Cue card.
cue cards. And Barney McNulty, who was Blondie's, you don't remember, this is all too old. Blondie, Dagwood and Blondie was where we made movies, and that's where I took myself away from it. Where am I now?
It was just
What state is this?
Dagwood and Blondie, you can forget about
Dagwood and Blondie, but anyway, his sister was Blondie. So he made these, so he hooks up the cards and we're reading them, and it's all Caesar's Palace jokes, you know, just brought Las Vegas kind of stuff. They're not particularly very funny. So I said, I've got to read them over. And Debbie was my dresser at that time, because I need, the bird is so big, it has to be picked up by a rear whoop. It's made of various whoops with netting on it, the feathers all glued on one at a time. Total about 7,000 feathers. But at that time, there was only more like 3. They do it better now. And she, by the beak, I would put it in, put my hand up in the head, and suddenly he's 8 feet 2. Pretty good for the smallest kid in the class. So I got ready for him when he walked out on stage. They just had to warm up for the audience, and 300 people in the audience. And he walks out, and Bird is standing there, and he says, Jesus, Bird. And I think Bird looks at him and said, gee, I thought I had a funny looking beak. And he has this ski nose. Actually, was boxing. Broke his nose in a perfect way. I'd go to take up boxing if somebody could make my nose look like his. It's perfect. But anyway, he thought he literally laughed so hard he had to go down and put his hand on the floor to keep from falling. So hard. And I can't tell you how satisfying it is to make America's leading comedian at the time, movie star, laugh that hard. And he walked out and I said, gee, I didn't know you'd be so little. And that's not even funny, but in context, he said, where are you in there, kid? You know, I said, no, listen, hey, I just where it is. And so I'm right there. And he said, okay, we'll start with that, instead of our crap. And, so I did, and I got a letter from him next week when I'm home. And it said, dear kid, you really made me laugh. Thanks a lot. Your friend, Bob. And that's on the wall. So 3 years later, Deb and I are driving home from Boston. Back towards northern Connecticut where I live. And it's 150 miles from where I work in New York. And we'd sit down for the week and come home once a week. And we try to listen to music straight on the news. And it's Hollywood Minute, and it's Bob Holt. What's up, Bob? He says, I'm going to go to Beijing, Red China. This was 1979, 3 years after I first worked with him. And nobody had been to China except Nixon, a few people. And now they're opening the door, so his show was the very first American show being allowed to film in Communist China. And so he said, I'm going to Red China, and what are you going to do there, Bob? I'm going to walk arm in arm with my big buddy Big Bird down the main street of Beijing, Red China. And I said, wow. I had already drawn a comic strip for 3 years that was published in Nanking before the communists took over. I started drawing a comic strip when I was 13. It was published in a Chinese American magazine, half in Chinese and half in English, about a Chinese dragon. And I drew the comic strip that went down because their writing was down. And so I had been always excited about going to China someday. And it was really fun going there then because there was not one skyscraper in Shanghai. Guess how many skyscrapers they have now? 2,000. It's a city of 16 million people. And there was not one. And we stayed in a place that was the most Art Deco, fabulous building, 22 hotel. And it was so strange how in China everybody was still wearing Mao jackets, no women in dresses. And all the only bright clothes those were on children. They were as Wright College University. So it was fun going back there, going back in time, because we last were there in 1997, training a young man to play a Chinese big bird. And then at that point there were about 20 skyscrapers. We added a few. But so it was very thrilling. So with Bob Hope, we did a show with Marisa Koff was with us. And Peace Caroll.
Crystal Gale.
Who?
Crystal Gale.
Crystal Gale, yeah. And he's on Vegas and she's. It was, also, what's the dragon?
What? Who? What?
No, the guy, the singer, the player, Captain and Tennille.
Oh, Captain Tennille. Oh.
So, he took his glasses off once and his eyes, they're that big. I mean, the pupils.
The biggest pupils you've ever seen.
But anyway, other doors have been open. I've been to the White House at least 8, 9 times. The first one we got a request from Patricia Nixon if we could have Sesame Street come and do a show there. We used to do a traveling show with the singers, and Big Bird and Oscar were the only puppets in it at that time. And so she was first, and I found out they wanted us to take pictures. And often, as Big Bird, my left hand operates. So I put my arm around somebody's shoulder for photos. And I thought, I don't know about my arm around, she seems a little stiff for that. So I just thought I'd put my hand on her shoulder like this. And that was a mistake. Because I feel his hand reach up and take my hand out. She never let it go again, so I wouldn't do that again. However, the very next one was Mrs. Ford, who did nothing but hug me. She was very outgoing. I think she was having a good time. Then the next was Mrs. Carter, who was very shy. And but I've done every.
We liked Mrs. Clinton.
Mrs. Clinton, Barbara Bush is very, very warm.
And Hillary played with puppets with her.
Hillary was we were asked to bring the puppets, some of the puppets from Sesame Street to the White House. And she sat on the floor of the White House in the China room, full of China, and playing with puppets. And she has a great sense of humor. It was fun to spend a little time with her. She put on the show. And the latest one, of course, is Michelle, and it was fun working with her. She's extremely outgoing and very personable and a very brilliant woman. And we know to me, she's the first lady of them all. I'm so impressed with her brilliance. And I had another request. I got a letter from 5 astronauts, and they said that they would like to have, would I be interested in going up in the space shuttle and bring Big Bird, and we would do parts of the show from space. And I thought, gee, I never thought I'd get a chance to work with the Earth. So I said yes. And then they found out that they couldn't fit Big Bird onto the plane. There's no storage room at all. It's very cramped. And they could have 5 people, or 5 or 6. They had 7, I think was the top number. But they couldn't go. So they did think of another way to do it, where Big Bird in the story had entered a contest to be the very first, have the first teddy bear go into space. And and Big Bird wrote why it would be good to have his teddy bear. Well, and Big Bird in the story gets chosen to have his teddy bear go up. And so they made plans, and he was even in the centrifuge where they roll around 9 Gs so to see if they could still be alive after that. They really put them through. I don't know if I could have done all that. But at the last minute, they decided not to have the teddy bear go. And because it was going to have Big Bird at Houston Control. One of the problems of it orbiting is that you can't sleep well, because talk about jet lag, you know what that's like. But you circle Earth every 95 minutes, and so they can't sleep well. So Big Bird's going to say, well, whenever I can't sleep, I grab hold of my radar, my teddy bear named after radar, who was a friend of mine from MASH, who had teddy bears, all the circle of life. So and so they were going to float, there's no gravity up there, so they were going to float the teddy bear over to the captain, who was his lounge sleep thing, and he grabbed it and cuddle up with it and go to sleep, and he would fake sleep for the film. But maybe because they could broadcast from that orbiting thing only, but there's a period every day where you can't do it because we're on the wrong side of the planet. When the time takes too long with so anyway, they canceled that idea, and so they had a teacher go up instead. Her name was Christy Collins, and that was the challenger. And we stopped production when we heard that it was time for it to go up. We all watched, and when it disintegrated, I can imagine how I felt I was supposed to be on it. And I thought of these souls who were on it, and what a tragedy that turned out to be. Well, I've got to work with a lot of great celebrities too, constantly. And there's actually probably as many as 150. But some are like Johnny Cash, I've sung songs with him on an album. Waylon Jennings became, of all the famous people I've ever worked with on the show, he's the only one we actually get to be great buddies. And he and his wife said, we have just 4 friends, Johnny and June, and you and Karen and Debbie. I said, wow, because he's a cool. I mean, on Oprah's show, Isaac Stern, who saved
Carnegie Hall.
Carnegie Hall. It was going to be torn down, one of the greatest concert halls in the world, and they wanted to put up a hotel in this place. So he got people in the industry to make such a protest they didn't do anything like turn it down. And I performed there myself, which is very exciting. I've sung with Ziggy Marley, with what's the name? Lance Bass.
Which guy?
The Lance Bass.
Oh, in sync?
In sync. I've sung with NSYNC. And I sang a line with Tony Bennett. I spent part of the afternoon with Joe Namath, who was very outgoing. Had lunch with Steve Martin, who was very funny. He said, can you pass the salt? I passed it to him. He said, oh, boy, I love salt. What's the shaker of salt? And our latest season this past year was a beautifully written show about being bullied. I was bullied around the Valley School. Just one time I had the satisfaction of winning. I was pushed into a circle by the whole gang of the kids there in the back of a country school. And little Dickie Rose was the one who wanted to beat me up. He started beating me up. And I couldn't get out. I tried to get out of the circle. They pushed me back in, and Dickie was swinging at me. And I then was so desperate, I held up and smacked him real hard in the face, and he turned bright red. And he burst into tears. I said, oh boy, he whacked up some work. Because he certainly, he should have seen me. And I think I had a black eye. So now going at it, and he's now crying and here, because they weren't happy, because they wanted to see him beat me up. I don't know why did they pick up things like that? So Sunday I was grabbed by the collar by Miss McCarthy, the scariest woman I've ever met in grade school. And I had to be on detention for a month for beating up this particular Rose. I won! That's the punishment. So I know exactly how Big Bird felt in this episode. Big Bird got bullied by some birds. He wanted to join the Good Bird Club. And our message there was the child was being bullied to talk about it, preferably with an adult, and realize they've done nothing wrong. More importantly, be happy with just who they are. And that's the thing with bullying. They really do need help. So if you see kids being bullied, see if you can step in.
I think we have.
Was it time?
Yeah.
Oh dear. All right, well, I think I pretty well covered a lot of things I was planning to say, but also I was told that people would like to have a chance to ask a few questions about the show. And if any questions? Yes.
Is it?
Jim Henson died in 1990. When or why? Well, of course, his major character, his signature character was, Jim Henson's lead character was Kermit the Frog. And right away, they did what Jim had always wished, that if characters get to be loved, that some of the other puppeteers take up the slack and learn to do it. And so it's now played by a man named Matt Vogel, who someday will be Big Bird if I can do it. And his last name, by the way, is a German name, means bird.
I'm gonna do.
Oh, okay. We're going to close, and I'm going to do a signing. You want to sign? You have books?
Yep.
Really?
Maybe Oscar can just say bye.
Yeah, Oscar. Bye.
Meet you over there.
Can I talk another hour, please?
This puppet has been working on the show for almost 40 years. Yeah, here I am. It's just been refurbished. Yeah, they give me a bath. I hated every moment of it. So, wave goodbye, Oscar. Goodbye, Oscar. Oh, you never let your hand in my hand, right? Don't do that. Okay.
Larry.